No, I'm not worried at all. I rely on God, Allah.
So Marxism basically failed even before the Soviet Union was created. The many Marxists realized that Karl Marx predicted that the revolution that he promised would happen in Western Europe because it was more heavily industrialized. His formulas predicted it would happen. No revolution happened in Western Europe. So many Marxists were disillusioned. They asked, why is this happening? Why did we not see the promised victory of the working class emancipating themselves? And they tried to, in essence, find out what went wrong with Marxism. So they tweaked the theory. They studied Sigmund Freud, they studied Nietzsche, the existentialists, and they began to adopt a new idea or theory about it. They said that the working class, their minds are controlled by the capitalist bourgeois state apparatus. They are deluded. And the only way to really liberate them is to liberate their minds from the control by the capitalist bourgeois. Now, Nietzsche argued that if there's no God, which he believed there was no God, he said that then morality doesn't exist, but then humans have to create morality. They have to create it. You have to, by dictate, you dictate it yourself, what morality is. You make your own morality. But this then led to the next devolution in the West of the idea of structuralism and post-structuralism. I'm not going to wave too many jargons at you. I'm going to keep it nice and simple. It's the point. That was the brief I was told. Abdullah, keep it simple. So I'll try to. But if there's also no God, by this argument, then the next kind of logical step they went is that all language is arbitrary. Meanings behind language is arbitrary. Who decided what each word would mean? Who decided it? Just society. Who's society to tell you, the individual, what words mean or what words don't mean? Right? And there's nothing higher than the individual. So how can society oppress you by telling you even what language, what the words are meant to mean? That was the next devolution of the term. Next slide, please, brother. So post-Marxism, simply, they came to the conclusion that if all minds and therefore all humans are equal, then everyone's interpretation of reality is also equal. Everyone's opinion is also equal. Why is that? Because they simply said that if all minds are equal, then everyone's concluding thoughts will also be equal. Right? Because then who are you to say to me, those might say, that your conclusion about the same facts is the right one? Right? If I have a different conclusion and we're both equal, then you have your truth and I have my truth. That's where they got that from. Just to summarizing it, I suppose. They even talked about, they called it the death of the author. They said that the books are not to be read to understand what the author intended behind the book, but what the reader finds useful or how the reader chooses to use the book, the meaning, that's the most important. Why? Because all minds are equal, and who is the author to tell you what to do? If you want to use his writings or her writings in your own way, you can do it. They call it the death of the author. They said in order for the reader to be born, the author must die, basically, metaphorically speaking. But then, as Nietzsche said, and this doesn't only come from Nietzsche, it came from Hegel, but I'm not going to go into too much into these philosophers, but they also argued that, then why do people express themselves? If everyone has their own opinions, why do they express their opinions? Why do they do that? And they say that's because it's the nature of humans to want to affect the outside world, to have power to affect the outside world. So all expression of opinion is not trying to give nasiha, advice to people, it's about power. It's all about power. That's how they argued it. So they say that injustice is not based on an idea of right and wrong. Injustice is simply if one group or person has more power or more privileged to their opinions over any other group, that's wrong, because everyone's equal. Now, many Muslims, they jump on this and they say, yeah, we use this against colonialism. We say colonialism is bad because the West told us what to do. Yeah? That's how they argue it. Whereas our argument is that, well, the West had no right given to them to go around the world and tell them that other people, they had superior values. That would be the argument, because their Aqidah was not true. It was a false one, and they have no justification for their Aqidah, therefore they lack the right to be able to spread it. But you might think, okay, so what's wrong with this? What's wrong with this? Okay, maybe then colonialism, we'll just argue it from an Islamic basis, why it's wrong. Well, this woke activism can be turned around against Muslims, and I've seen it, and they say Islam is Arab colonialism. Or they say that Islam, Arabic is the language of the Quran and you have to all learn it to access it. That's Arab supremacy. I've seen them argue this. That's the natural conclusion they're going to go to, because they're applying the same tools. Yeah, you just thought they'd apply it only to the West. No, they'll apply it to everybody. You're next. Not the basis for our argument. They also argue against, they reject all grand narratives. It's a long story why they do that, but they're disillusioned with Marxism. Marxism had grand narratives. Capitalism has grand narratives. But guess what? Islam and the Quran has grand narratives. A big story that explains, mankind, what it's here to do, the purpose of mankind, heaven and hell, those who become kuffar, those who be Muslim. This is a grand narrative. Guess what? If they reject all grand narratives, they're going to reject Islam next. And any Muslim that adopts woke activism, they're going to be rejecting Islam soon thereafter. The argument is that in order for humans to be fully liberated as individuals, it's not just you have to live under liberal government or what have you. They criticize liberal governments for not giving enough real freedom. Why is that? Because they say that society is oppressing the individual by forcing the individual into particular roles. The only way to liberate yourself is you should take control of your own narrative and identify yourself any way you want. Right? That's where the idea of identification, you identify as a 7-year-old girl and you could be a 60-year-old guy, right? Well, that's your identification. Who is anyone else to say that's wrong? You say, well, it's wrong because clearly they haven't 7 years old and it's 7 cycles around the sun and the person's not a female. They say, we're not talking about the physical form. We're not talking about the amount of physical time. We're talking about the social idea of a girl, of a 7-year-old girl and to be a woman. Those are things which are socially constructed, and anyone can choose to identify any way they wish in society, and you have to respect that, otherwise you're committing an aggression against them, a microaggression. And in certain countries, it might even be illegal to not recognize somebody's chosen pronouns. Then they say that if everyone's opinions are equal, and everyone's truth is equal, then no one can argue against your truth. And you'll say your truth is based on your own life experience, and so they say that everyone has their own lived experiences. It's called standpoint epistemology, which simply means that your truth is your truth, and it's a truth, and it's an equal amount, it's equal truth as any other truth. But here's the thing: they'll say that if you do not have certain attributes, let's say if you're a white guy or you're a black guy or what have you, a white guy can't talk about people who are like African Canadian or some of this. So a white European Canadian can't talk about a black African Canadian. They'll say because you don't know their lived experience as a black African Canadian, so you can't talk about them. And they might say, well, but I'm not talking about what it is my experience living as an African Canadian. I've got some statistics here which are based on surveys, which are based on facts. Like no. But because you haven't lived it, you can't talk about a lived experience. Well, I'm not talking about lived experience. I'm just talking about some statistics here, right? Which is a bit more objective, I suppose. But that's why they would argue against that. But they'd also say to that, African Canadian, that you're a guy, you can't talk about women because you're not a woman. Right? But you say, well, I'm not saying I know what it feels like to be a woman. I'm simply saying that, for example, if women are pregnant, you should have, the hospitals should make sure they are looked after and, given medical attention. They'll say, well, they won't usually complain about that, but technically they could say, you can't talk about women though, because you're not a woman. Like, but surely, I understand the concept of being pregnant and requiring medical attention and care and so on. I don't have to be pregnant myself to know that. Yeah. But they'll say, no, but you can't talk about it. Although they don't mind kind of feminists talking about, who are women, talking about men, though. They seem to make an exception for that. But they'll say it's okay for those who are being oppressed, the oppressed minority, to speak about the oppressors. That's how they would argue it. There's other things like cultural appropriation, where they say that even using aspects of other people's culture without giving it the same respect that it was possessed by the original culture is appropriation. They especially don't like people of dominant cultures taking or using aspects of minority cultures. They say that's dominating them by simply taking, you're like stealing from their culture by using it yourself, or using, like, take their dress or food. I mean, technically speaking, I suppose, if I go into a Somali restaurant and enjoy Somali food, I'm committing cultural appropriation, perhaps, right? Because they might be able to argue, well, you're not Somali, so why are you enjoying their culture? It's like, well, because it's tasty. So they say identity is a social construct, so to liberate individuals, everyone's self-identifications must be respected, and all lifestyle choices are not just legal, but they'd say are morally valid. Right? So if you ever denounce, let's say, same-sex intercourse, or even extramarital intercourse, or premarital intercourse, they'll say that you can't do that. And so you might think, well, even premarital intercourse, they would say you can't condemn that. Yeah, they call it slut shaming. I've heard that term. Yeah, they call it slut shaming. You're shaming somebody for indulging in a lifestyle choice concerning their sexuality. You're making them feel bad for it by telling them that it's haram. Right? So why do you think many Muslims jump on this? And you might be thinking, but why would they jump on this? Why would they adopt this? Because the woke activism of these post-Marxists, they offer Muslims, they say, we will protect you against the right wing. Because you Muslims identify as Muslim, so we protect that identification because it's a self-identification or a group identity, which they say is socially constructed, but it's being used to oppress you and discriminate against you, basically. So many Muslims go, oh, thank you, left-wing guys. Thank you, woke activists. Yeah, we'll go under your umbrella. What do you mean? What's this price tag? Right? And the price tag is they're happy to defend you having the label Muslim just as long as there's no content behind that label. You're an empty jar. You can keep the label on the jar, but should be nothing inside it. Because whatever you believe that is from Islam will contradict their worldview and their beliefs and their ideas. And many Muslims, again, will leave Islam after adopting this system. Because if you read their books, it's argued very persuasively. If you read any book, if you read liberalism, even if you read conservative books, and you don't know much about the Deen of Islam or how Islam has an alternative or how it has a superior argument to all these things, you could be persuaded by these books. Many Muslims ask me, Abdullah, can you recommend a book for me to read to study political philosophy and so on? I'm like, I'm very reticent to suggest it because maybe if you don't understand Islam enough, you might think, well, that makes sense. If you read Karl Marx's books, it makes sense if you just read it. But then when you kind of zoom out of it, you think, oh, wait a second, that doesn't make sense. Yeah, so anyway, so what I'll say, brothers and sisters, is we have to be aware of these modern ideologies that cause conflict. They will cause conflict in the Muslim community, and they certainly cause conflict amongst non-Muslims, right? From culture wars in the United States of America to actual wars in Ethiopia, in Ukraine, and even just tensions even in Canada between French speakers and English speakers, as well as racism, as well as fascism, as well as a whole bunch of these issues, and popularism. these are ideologies that do not create unity but create discord. So we must instead eschew those things and follow the creator of the universe, who behind all things is the one unity behind all things. He created all things, and through him we can be unified on the truth, because he is al-haq. There's no multiple truths. Yeah, there's only one truth. Okay, barakallahu feekum.